I'm here with Courtney Ch'ng Lancaster, one of the stars of the Soulpepper production of The Crucible by Arthur Miller. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
For those not familiar with the work, tell me a bit about The Crucible, the story of it, as well as the real-life historical inspiration behind the piece.
Right. Well, it's based on, of course, the Salem witch trials in what was known as the colony of the Bay of Massachusetts in the late 1600s. And it's a small village, Salem, and historically, a sort of wave of, I guess they'd call it hysteria, hit the town, and these young girls, they were very young, 11, 12, these young women started accusing people of witchcraft. And there's lots of historical documentation about what happened. Arthur Miller comes along and uses some of that, and of course changes things. It takes artistic license, but really keeps the core of that hysteria and that pressure on the town and turns it into this play, which he wrote, of course, based on the McCarthy trials of the 50s, the idea of a witch hunt, and yeah, that's sort of the basis of the play.
And tell me about your character. What role does she play in the story?
Well, Mary Warren is she's 18 years old, she's quite naive, and she's John Proctor and Elizabeth Proctor's servant girl. She's only been with them for about 7 months because up until I came along, Abigail Williams, who was sort of the main antagonist of the play, was the servant girl at the Proctors. Abigail Williams has an affair with John Proctor, gets kicked out of the house, and later on goes on to accuse Elizabeth Proctor of witchcraft. So you can see there's a certain element of vengeance in her character. Mary Warren wants so desperately to be friends. She's a very lonely girl. She wants so desperately to have friends, to have a family, but she's got nobody. She's very lonely, and she really gets pushed around a lot by Abby and the other girls in the village. She's also a somewhat mousy girl and is somewhat afraid of John Proctor. So in the story, I begin the play in this very fearful place. And then as these witch trials begin, and the girls take on this position of power in the village because they're accusing people, and everybody wants to know whether or not the girls think so-and-so's a witch, suddenly Mary Warren gets this power. Because along with Abby, she can accuse people of witchcraft. And so she really gains this sudden righteous power, which is really seductive, I think. And so she comes in about halfway through the play. She returns home to her home with John Proctor and Elizabeth Proctor, and she suddenly becomes sort of fired up with this righteous indignation about all these witches in town. And it's kind of scary how quickly this naive, innocent girl gets turned and suddenly wants to accuse people because of the seductive nature of this righteous power, this righteous fire. But then towards the end of the play, she's not a fundamentally bad person, and the opportunity comes along for her to actually tell the truth and save everybody, particularly Elizabeth Proctor, but to reveal to everybody that the girls have been making this up. And she wants to, she really wants to, but it's so hard when you're in that kind of situation. You've got the pressure of this courtroom and all of these powerful men around you, and then the girls turn on her, and she doesn't really have a choice. She tries very hard, but fundamentally she can't do it. She's too weak.
Arthur Miller's original intent was to comment, as you said, on the McCarthy hearings and the whole kind of communist witch hunt in general. It's also easy to watch the piece and draw other more contemporary parallels. Have there been any elements of the play that you found echo in the world around us?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can call it a terrorist witch hunt that happens primarily in the States, but I think also in Canada and North America and around the world, accusing people because of the way that they look, the way that they dress. And also, I mean, there are places in the world where actual witch hunts, and I'm talking about people who get accused of witchcraft, still happen. And there are places where people still get executed to this day for so-called witchery. So that certainly happens. I also think there's a parallel to be drawn with the recent case in Russia with Pussy Riot, with people not being able to speak their minds because of a situation of oppression around them.
On a less symbolic level, the Crucible also criticizes the power of superstition and supernatural spirituality or that which it can have over otherwise rational people and rational thought.
Yeah.
The theater world is a reasonably secular one, but it's also, well, I should say a lot of actors are notoriously superstitious. Fortunately, we are in a library right now, so we can say Macbeth, but there are a lot of people who would not say it within 20 yards of a stage.
Yeah.
How have you interpreted this aspect of the piece?
The fear of superstition, the fear of... It has an incredible power over us, as the fear of the unknown, And I've thought a lot about how these people in this tiny village, they've only been there for about 70 years. The colony's only been established for about 70 years. It's a tiny village on the edge of the ocean, facing a huge, vast forest that is completely unknown. As far as they can tell, the forest starts and they have no idea where it ends, North America had not been explored at this point in history. So can you imagine looking into that dark forest and having no idea what might possibly come out of it? And you're coming from this religious, this Puritan background, and so of course the fear of the devil is so strong in you. So everything that is dark and unknown can only really be ascribed to the devil and to evil forces. And of course there's First Nation tribes with whom they had a somewhat tumultuous relationship, and so attacks would happen with some frequency. People would get killed from these forces coming out of the woods. And so I can understand how, in order to gain some kind of control over your world, you start to make things up, I think. And it's the same in the theater a little bit when we I don't think actors do it so much anymore, the whole Macbeth thing, but acting is such a mysterious thing too. You go out on stage and you try to become somebody else for that period of time, and you try to imagine to the point of believing something. And it's a little bit mysterious, and so we also, out of that fear, I think, try to come up with ways to control it and understand it. You can't say Macbeth.
Yeah, if you don't see this word, then everything
will be fine. Nothing bad will happen. And so it's kind of, I can understand why they have that fear,
As an actor, you are handed a really weighty script. It's Arthur Miller's language is very literary in tone. It's not so natural that it just rolls off the tongue, but it's not so poetic that there's a natural rhythm to it either. Tell me a bit about the process of taking his very rigid words and making them sound as though they're coming out of a human mouth.
Funny, my character Mary Warren, like I said earlier, she's younger. She doesn't have a lot of power or agency in her world, So her language, the text he gives me, I wouldn't say that it is as elevated as some of the other characters in the play, as their text might be. For me, it fits in my mouth very comfortably, coming from the East Coast. Actually, I'm from Nova Scotia, and she sort of talks a little bit like people in the East Coast talk. Quite colloquial. However, other characters in the play, John Proctor, our leading man, he talks very plainly throughout, but there are moments in the play, I think, where the stress of the situation becomes so extreme that he cannot help but jump into this somewhat heightened mode of speaking to talk about God and God's icy wind and vengeance but I think Stuart Hughes has made it very natural in that the extremity of the position his character is in.
Stuart Hughes, who plays
John Proctor fabulously, and the moment where he's talking like that is so extreme that he cannot help but need to use these huge poetic words. And that's always why we need poetry. Poetry is when the human spirit has been pushed to these extremes that we cannot just use our regular everyday language to express it. We need something more.
One of the notable technical elements of the production is the dim and natural lighting that is often meant to mimic candlelight, which would have been the only source of lighting they would have had, beyond sunset. Does that ambience inform your performance, or does it modify the way in which you and your castmates interact?
100%. It really does inform it, and that comes from Albert Schultz, the director of the show, right from the beginning. And this is also echoed in the stage design, which is one platform where everything takes place, all in this sort of single room. right from the beginning, he wanted us all to keep in mind that all of these huge events take place in these small rooms. The first scene takes place in a girl's bedroom. The second scene takes place in a small country farmhouse living room. The third scene's in a courthouse, and the fourth is in a jail. So extreme situations taking place in these small, oppressive rooms, in which there are all of these people going through these huge emotional swings, but all within the same room. And so we're talking to each other very intimately. And so the candlelight, even in rehearsal, he would often dim the lights, Albert would, just to remind us to keep talking to each other, just very intimately and very, very directly. And I think the candlelight, which has continued on into the production now, I think that really feeds that sense of an oppressive, small space.
You're part of the coveted Soulpepper Academy. How does the Academy differ as a learning environment in comparison to other classes and courses you've taken?
Wow, it's awesome. The Academy has been a gift right from the beginning. We've had 1 year, and I think where it differs is, when I was in university, I did my Bachelor of Fine Arts in university at UBC, and I had a great time doing that. I was younger then, and just trying to figure out what this whole acting thing was all about. The Academy is also really about crafting you as an artist. So we do lots of acting, but all kinds of acting. We've worked on Brecht, we've worked on Shakespeare, we've worked on Beckett, we've worked on Judith Thompson, Neil Simon. But then we've also done other things. We've done clown and music and improv. And then all the way through, right from the beginning, there's been this thread of creation, of trying to give us some license as artists in our own right, with a real emphasis on, you see when you go into the rehearsal hall here at Soulpepper that the actors here are creative actors. They're not sitting back and waiting for the director to come along and say, you're going to do it like this, you're going to stand here and you're going to say it like this. They're always creating, as it should be, they're creating their characters. They all come together and create the play, and that's what they tried to impart to us. Successfully, I hope, in the Soulpepper Academy, that you are an artist, you have to be creative all the time. So on top of creating characters, we made a play together. We had a 7-week creation project where we went from having nothing to making a show that we presented we ran it for 2 weeks in front of audiences. So right from the beginning, there's been that positive pressure to create and deliver.
Very neat. A hypothetical. If Albert Schultz, Stuart Hughes, and Oliver Dennis all entered a freestyle rap battle, what would they rap about and who would win?
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, Stewie Hughes would have a banjo.
Does he actually play?
You know what? He has been playing it sometimes in the courtyard backstage. We've got a little bit of an outdoor space. Mm-hmm. And I think just to relax after the extreme stress his character goes through, he goes and he plays a little bit of banjo, and he's great. And so he would be playing the banjo and rapping. And Oliver Dennis, who is the funniest man on the planet, would he'd be trotting around showing off his tight little socks that he wears in the show and how fine his calves are, because he's a triathlete also, so he's got very nice calves. I shouldn't even be telling you these things. So he'd be dancing around showing off his calves, and Albert Schultz would be correcting everybody else's rapping. Oh, I'm going to get in so much trouble, and giving them tips on how to rap better while rapping himself. Yes, that's how that would go.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, you're most welcome.